welcome to the stage our panel that's going to talk about security advantage and an innovation for stronger Canadian defence. Our moderator is Sonya Shorey from Invest Ottawa, and I'll allow you to introduce your panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. How many folks in this room are from outside of Ottawa? Show of hands. Wonderful. Welcome to Canada's capital. We're thrilled to have you with us, and it's a pleasure to be here. I want to extend sincere thanks to Mike for the opportunity to join you and the entire IAC team for this incredible conference. Congratulations on what you have established. As many of you know, Canada is at a defining moment. Our sovereign future not only depends on the technologies we develop, but what we as Canadians own, our IP and our data. This is why we are incredibly grateful to the Government of Canada for renewing the 3 critical IP programs in this country: IAC, Elevate IP, and IP Assist by NRC IRAP. Last night, approved in that budget, I know that we were all heartened, and we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot more collaboration, optimization, and impact that we can achieve through these 3 programs, which are the backbone of the IP that founders capture, protect, commercialize, that underpins our security, our competitiveness, and our long-term prosperity. From our vantage point here in your capital city, this is an essential, and it's particularly relevant to our dialogue today on defense. A few weeks ago, here in the capital, together with our partners in Gatineau, we launched an evolving Canada's capital strategy as a national defense innovation hub serving our country, forces, and allies. While we collaborate intensely here in our region, we are even more excited to collaborate with those right across the country because we face grand challenges. We want to put our unique assets to work to deliver greater impact for our country. And IP is the connective tissue that brings it all together that will help us to achieve even greater economic impact. We know if we want to build sovereign capabilities, accelerate defense modernization, and scale technologies in areas like cyber, AI, machine learning, all of the different technologies that underpin defense innovation, semiconductor, we absolutely must protect the IP, defend it, and grow it here. And we cannot compete globally if our most valuable assets leave our country before they ever reach their full potential. This is why this dialogue we're going to have today matters so much. It requires a whole of Canada approach, particularly with the investments that are coming now in defense. So I know all of us in this room are committed to one thing: helping our innovators, founders, and companies put that IP to work to drive as much impact as possible to ensure it's protected and leveraged fully. And in the defense sector, we are going to have an incredibly provocative and exciting dialogue, I know, because I did all of the discussions leading up with these 3 gentlemen. We are going to talk today about the critical role of IP in defense, the opportunities, challenges, and what we need to do in this country to ensure that it delivers the value we need it to. So, gentlemen, please introduce yourselves, your role in your organization, and why sovereign IP in defense is so critical at this moment in time in our country. Mike, we're going to start with you.
Hi, everyone. I introduced myself earlier today, but I'm the CEO at the Innovation Asset Collective. We are focused on helping Canada's SMEs create the IP strategies they need to compete in global markets, and to improve the freedom to operate, they need to access those markets. And it's really that last piece that I think is critical to this conversation, in particular around creating sovereign supply chains, whether those be in defense or other key areas for our economy. The large international players that currently dominate those supply chains hold significant IP positions. And unless we're able to build positions to counterbalance that and create a currency of exchange within that environment, we are going to be very restricted in our ability to have success and grow those supply chains to the state that is going to allow success for this country.
Amazing way to kick us off, and I know it builds on the work that you've done all morning. Glenn.
Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Cowan. I'm the founder and managing partner of a venture capital firm called 19, and we are Canada's only sort of focused investor on national security technologies, defense technologies, and dual use. My background is with the Canadian Armed Forces. I served for 19 years with a strategic military unit that did tactical operations of strategic value to the Government of Canada, often bordering into intelligence operations. And why IP is really important, and the pivot from special operations and intelligence community operations into venture capital, is that we need to start providing trusted patient capital into the companies with core IP as their IP becomes increasingly relevant from a national security strategy. And why this is super important and relevant and why I'm pretty passionate about it is because Canada is at war. And if you don't think we are, you are woefully naive. And the phase 0 conflict that is actually unfolding right now is how strategic nation states use economic statecraft to wage economic warfare in advance of a kinetic war. And this phase of operation is playing out, and IP is often a battleground as we look to egress core technologies and core IPs to the benefit of one country to the detriment of another.
This is a no-holds-barred discussion today. It's going to be fascinating. Hamid, welcome.
Hi, my name is Hamid Arabzadeh. I'm co-founder and CEO of Ranovus. We build optical interconnect technologies to scale AI compute clusters. Our company's been around for 14 years. We're going to be scaling it to take it public in 2 years from now. And we have a fairly major contract with DARPA, and wanted to share some of those insights as we've earned them through the years. As a hardware company, I would say the supply chain is quite critical, like Mike was saying, and we'll get into that discussion. But in general, I would say that IP is really, defendable IP is really, or valuable IP is really created around the customer table. It's not something that a professor at university comes up with. Pause for effect, you know. And it's definitely not something that a group of young students could get together and spin off a company and make it to the top of the heap. It's something that you discover with the customers, solving their problems, looking at the technologies, not having any religion about which technologies you use to implement the solution. That's a very important thing. System thinking is very important. It's not component thinking. And we have an abundance of that, or we had abundance of that in the Canadian companies here, like Nortel, BlackBerry, Mitel, and others, Newbridge and others. And now that has gone, majority of it is in multinational corporations. So the people who are here in those companies are around customer tables around the world, finding the solutions that they need and developing the IP here in Canada, which is then owned by the country of origin of that company. So defense, I think, is the one place where the IP and the intimacy with the government, with the defense sector, is a proprietary table. It's not a commercial table. I think there's RFQs. If you want to sell to Microsoft, they'll have RFQs for their hyperscalers and all the other things they need to do. And you get visibility to a lot of things that they want to do. And they move forward and position those things to the industry so that they have a big supplier base. Defense is very different. You're trying to do something for a country, and you want to make sure that it is unique, differentiated, and it is, it's not hackable. It's like a whole bunch of things. So I think the intimacy of the companies in Canada, this is really a unique time that the companies in Canada and the defense sector in Canada, from a government perspective, could partner together to develop some unique IP. And then that IP would be very, very sought after around the world. Now, if the defense industry partners with the multinationals here, like all the integrators and other players who are trying to bring Canadian companies to service the end goal, those multinational companies, the integrators, will absorb most of the know-how and the IP from the Canadian companies that get funneled through them. So I'm sure we're going to talk about some of these topics, but I think defense is a very unique place for IP. And we got to really take advantage of it right now. The other sectors, most of the IP is going to be developed based on customer requirements outside Canada.
In the lead up to this panel, I said we could spend 3 hours with these gentlemen. They are such experts in their areas and lots of provocative topics, as you can see. We're going to kick off with Glenn, because you just delivered some very powerful words. Glenn, what do you think is the state of our defense innovation ecosystem today? And in particular, where do you see IP protection fitting into that system, given the realities you've just started to hint at around adversarial IP extraction and foreign capital pressures?
Just to kind of riff on what Hamid was saying, why defense is different is because, and I love the notion of public-private partnership with really cutting-edge disruptive technology companies integrating into sort of providing unique solutions for a government customer like the Canadian Armed Forces or the national security apparatus writ large. Ultimately, what the IP is going to deliver downrange is tactics, techniques, and procedures that are going to deliver a realistic military effect for the benefit of the customer. And so that's ultimately what needs to be developed, safeguarded, built, championed, responsibly shared through interoperability with our alliances and our partners, because it is delivering some sort of effect where there is a mission success element, there's a force protection element, or there is some other military or defense objective that this, call it the secret sauce or the value of these technologies that is being unlocked by this IP. To the question on where's the state of the union with Canada and our defense apparatus, like, it's pretty immature. Historically, our Canadian Armed Forces has been a terrible customer. That is hopefully changing. Our procurement process is too slow, it's too cumbersome, it's too bureaucratic, and we're not delivering funding or developing the capabilities that the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces and our intelligence agencies need to do their jobs when they're downrange. And so the good news is that it kind of can't get worse from where we have been in the last 12 months. So we're only going up. And we're seeing really great examples of traction in the budget that passed yesterday, the noble efforts to bring in a defense investment agency, which is sort of a streamlined procurement process, and this sort of newfound way of sort of accepting public-private partnership. Because what's happening in the national security technology space is the government used to have a monopoly on these core capabilities, and that doesn't exist anymore. And so, when I was a ground force commander in early Afghanistan and I needed sub-1 meter imagery to find an Al-Qaeda guy in his house, I had to go to a national strategic asset to task a satellite to get me that imagery. Now I can just buy it from SpaceX or the whole host of other satellite providers that are providing better imagery, faster, cheaper, and delivered on target. And so there's been a democratization to the defense industry when it comes to emerging technologies that used to have sort of this core monopoly with government agencies. There's no better example of SpaceX rescuing the 2 astronauts from the ISS when Boeing and NASA couldn't do it. That is probably the best example of how sort of emerging cutting-edge venture-backed technology companies are having these impacts and effects that used to be in the realm of government. So I think we're on a good path in Canada. There's a lot of good momentum, and it's really heartening to see the streamlined nature of how we can kind of make up for lost time, capitalize on the lessons learned of other of our allies to deliver these capabilities, thought leadership, processes for the benefit of our national security apparatus.
There's a lot of momentum, and that budget passing last night creates a lot of opportunity. It's how we choose to put that to work. One of the ways we need to put that to work in this country, we need to determine what actually constitutes and defines a Canadian company. It's a big, big topic. It's one that we spent some time on as a panel. Ownership, control, IP location, talent, there's many different ways to look at it. I want to hear from all of you on this topic because it's going to be a very important one as we go forward. Start with Mike.
So I wish there was a simple answer to it. If I look at our membership, right, we're contracted to serve Canadian companies, and we face a number of different situations. In fact, we just had to take a company that asked to be a member to ISED to get clarification if they should qualify or not, because we see situations with executive teams split between multiple countries, investors from outside of Canada coming in and taking a minority stake. What is the threshold there for a change in control that would say they're no longer Canadian? If the majority of the talent is still in Canada. So I think it's a multi-factor piece that has to be weighed a bit in gradients. I'm not sure if there's a black and white answer. If either of these individuals have one, I would love to hear it because it would simplify things for us greatly.
Hamid.
Yeah, I mean, I have a simple answer. Having an address in Canada doesn't count. This is really, really ridiculous. That's such a low bar. I mean, everybody will have an address here, and we post office, post box office or something like that. But I'd say the challenge is really the ownership of the IP is really the most critical element, and whether or not that IP is owned by a Canadian-owned entity, which there's a clear definition, in what is a Canadian, like a CCPC status. There's a couple of other things. We've been beneficiary of having support from BDC, EDC, OMERS Ventures through their venture arm, and also through other amazing organizations like ISED, STTC, SIF, and others. And through that process, we see how they vet the companies. I think that's, of course, some of them give money to multinationals. I just saw EDC giving $3 billion to Ericsson. That's pretty extraordinary. But their definition is pretty clear. I don't think, number of employees count. Because where's the IP registered? And to whose benefit is it registered? I think that's the only thing we need to answer, in my opinion.
I'm certainly not qualified to answer that from a pragmatic perspective. I hear there's some good IP lawyers in the room that might be better suited to answer that question. From a practical perspective, I would frame what constitutes IP in a defense perspective is if and when it carries on into a classified domain, and who is the approving authority for that classification. And I think that is probably an aspect of IP that might be overlooked predominantly from a commercial perspective, but that's how I would sort of frame where the interest of the stakeholder of who's classifying that particular widget or technology or algorithm or technology effect into a classified domain. And in a military and government sort of angle is there's certain approvals and requirements and responsibilities for who can classify and declassify certain aspects of things. So I would sort of propose that maybe that's a thought process that gets integrated into the discussion of IP ownership, specifically for a national security focused technology.
Building on that defense, cyber, aerospace, dual use focus. I know, Mike, you and I have chatted a little bit about the common pitfalls, challenges that you see with respect to founders and companies in that defense context. What have you seen with IAC, or more broadly in this community that you've assembled and brought together with all the different partners, players, and vendors?
So I'll answer it more broadly first, because I think there's a common approach to intellectual property that's very reactive. We've invented something cool, let's file a patent around it, or let's trade it as a trade secret. But it's reactive to the technical step of invention. And we are huge advocates for formulating IP strategy that is very business focused. And Hamid, I loved your comment about sitting at the customer table where the greatest innovation happens. So to us, it is layering into that strategy, what are the aspects of your business that cause you to win sales, right? What are the customer exploration conversations that are happening that are getting traction? And how do we create ownership positions as an early stage business around those areas? Not about something cool we invented in the lab, but let's vet those cool things we invented in the lab about what causes the market traction, what's going to drive revenue, and make sure we have a plan over time to secure ownership of that through a variety of rights, not just a single patent or a single trade secret. How do we create integration or a lattice effect of rights across that? In defense, I think you then layer in classification to that. You layer in the potential for enforced licensing by governments to ramp up volume or to give access to strategic partners. That needs to be factored into your thinking. But I think the core concepts of IP strategy still apply.
I just want to go to Glenn for a minute because we had a really interesting conversation about some of the risks with respect to IP in a defense context that you highlighted, right within your corporation.
As a venture investor looking and doing diligence on IP of a company before we make an investment, I assume the IP is compromised, and I assume the IP is already egressed from whatever safeguards that are in that company or that technology has tried to instill. The level of penetration from adversarial nation states into all of our ecosystems is unfathomably deep. And I look at IP like I would look at cybersecurity and think there's two kinds of companies that have been hacked, those that have been hacked and those that don't know it yet. And I would apply the same sort of thinking to your IP strategy if you think your IP strategy is safeguarded. And so what we ended up doing to counter this is we actually invested and built a company that can diligence economic statecraft through really powerful data sets. And with 100% efficacy, we've been able to illuminate risk profiles into every single company and organization, whether it's government, academia, every stage of company scale. And we have found with 100% efficacy that there is adversarial nation-state penetration with a view of exfilling IP from all of these agencies. And I could, direct you to some open source stuff where the most protected moat, which is the US nuclear missile program, has been penetrated to the tune of 160 scientists in that program with links to the Communist Party of China. And if you think your organization is safeguarded, it is not. Neither is any agency or organization in Canada. It's just a reality of life that we have to contend with. So we always approach it assuming that IP has been compromised and that it's in someone else's hands for whatever purposes that they want to utilize it for. Now again, I'm looking at it from a nation-state perspective, not a competitive market landscape or a commercial aspect or from that sort of thing. We do look at that as we diligence companies, but really what we're focused on is the national security implications of some of these IPs in an adversarial context.
There's so much to consider, and I'm sure there's a lot of interesting dialogues that are going to spring from this following this discussion. We need more companies building sovereign IP here, and Hamid, you have built sovereign capability at scale from Ottawa. We are thrilled you are building here. What lessons does Ranovus have that could guide Canada in turning advanced R&D into sovereign industrial capacity, and what role has IP played in your specific journey in scaling Ranovus?
So our journey actually started with a foundry here in Ottawa, which was owned previously by Nortel. It's a compound semiconductor foundry that builds components that lasers and that emit light, just like light bulbs, but for optical communication. And this asset was transferred to the government when Nortel was being taken apart, and some very wise people saved this jewel of the country. So when I first started talking to them in 2012, I recognized that there was a lot of know-how there, but over the years, this 2012, since Nortel's demise, that was like at least I guess 6-7 years, there was a lot of elements of government had penetrated the mindset of the people. And not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but for some things in terms of commercial relationships and other areas, it wasn't really to the scale that you could build a supply chain based on that facility. And we started a significant IP development in that facility, and 4 years into the program, I got a note from the president of NRC. I've gone through four presidents already. And he sent me a note saying, we're sorry to tell you that your files have been compromised because we have now evidence that Chinese-based part of the Chinese government has infiltrated our firewalls and what have you. And I was looking at it, I said, I wonder what they think of what we've done. Because we're not finished yet, right? I told him, I said, well, if they figure out all the issues we still have, then maybe I license it back from them, No, but it was amazing. And they went offline, the entire place. I don't know, some of you might have been in that era. No computer access, you couldn't send anyone emails. It was a nightmare. But it was a great wake-up call, and I used it inside our company and say, well, this is the government of Canada, right? Our National Research Council, the center of excellence for everything, right? And here's the letter. I showed it to all our employees, and I said, well, how are we gonna deal with this? And of course, at that time, Huawei had a major presence here, and they had somehow got a hold of one of our quantum dot lasers and disassembled them. I ended up hiring a Canadian guy who was doing that afterwards when they fall apart, and he told me all the details of how they went and disassembled everything here in Ottawa, next door to us, right? So there's you cannot stop that, as you were saying. This is just not something you can stop. I think you need to run faster. and you need to develop the IP at much higher level in the stack. If someone can manufacture what you've done somewhere else and copying the know-hows and a few other things, that's just not of great value. You have to go higher up. You look at NVIDIA, for example. They went from chip development to system development. Now they have data center solutions. They're ruling the world. Look at Broadcom. They went from chip development to buy software companies like VMware and dominating all the data centers around the world and getting rent from that VMware software. I wasn't here to listen to Craig's things, but he would tell you a lot about that on ThinkOn and other things we're doing. So you have to go up the stack and create that IP. Unfortunately, in defense, there's no opportunity for Canadian companies to go up the stack because the system integrators, which are US-based companies, control the stack. We have widget companies in Canada selling services, selling a little chip here, a little thing here. Government is not interested in widgets. They're interested in solutions. And the integrator will tell them, I can take care of all of these. So we were in a meeting that Sonya had arranged where there were multinationals and also some Canadian companies talking about defense. And the gentleman who was responsible for this from a government side said, well, we have to make the procurement easier. And we need to purchase a lot of legacy components and all that. And I raised my hand. I said, well, that gives all the procurement facility. That actually makes us sell more to foreign multinationals. Easier, right? Make the procurement easier. Great. Buy legacy. Why are we not thinking about innovation from dual use perspective? Have a channel through DRDC, have a channel through other places that are innovative engines in Canada and really create something like DARPA has done or other things. When I mentioned this in another panel, I feel really bad repeating things because they're the same audience. But the first meeting I had with DARPA, after our presentation, they said, well, we haven't seen anything like this around US, so we're going to contract this with you and Cerebras, who's our partner. And the next question was, can we take you to the Department of Energy? Can you take you to the... They were telling me, they were actually pulling us into this direction because the interest is in commercialization. And I'm thinking, oh my God, now we're getting to sell all our stuff into the US government now, you know? When I go back to our office, what do they say? Actually, I had this in my info session. 3 people raised their hand. Are we in a good position selling this thing to DARPA? Should we just hold this? I said, guys, we need to run faster. And at one point in time, the Canadian government will catch up. We have to be there. Because this is the challenge. You know, government wakes up and says AI. And they look and see in the stack, what do we have? All the companies have to be ready by that time, right? Because that's the time they woke up to say AI. This is the problem we have intrinsically, I think, in the defense. We don't have anybody up there that is a system integrator that we can then bring Canadian IP through it and not lose the IP to foreign multinationals. I think this is...
And we're changing that because there's some great Canadian sovereign-focused, like Canadian capitalized companies that are going to give some of these legacy integrators and OEMs a run for their money with the disruption that we're about to unlock with some really compelling Canadian entrepreneurs and founders. From the perspective of safeguarding IP and a couple of recommendations that we've seen through companies that we've been integrated with, one thing that's massively lacking in Canada, and there's some really concerted efforts to try to fix this right now, is a trusted stack of patient capital. We do not have a Canadian sovereign fund where we can use significant amounts of capital to invest in core Canadian companies that we want to retain into Canada. One of the trends that we're seeing that our adversaries surreptitiously use as a way of egressing IP is through investment, through venture capital, through taking early stage controlling ownership and shareholder positions in these companies, and then increasing that exposure over time or egressing that capability. Or they just blatantly give a way marked up term sheet to a compelling piece of technology and they just buy that founder's technology and they're unabashedly shameless in how they do it. And we have no mechanism in Canada to match that capital. And so, you know, we're working hard with a lot of our capital partners to try to advocate and lobby for this strategic pool of capital. As company owners or holders of IP, you can have the most safeguarded IP, cybersecurity protocols and governance within your companies. If you leave your front door open and bring the wrong people in, none of the work that you've done is worth anything. And we see this with cyber a lot. And so we say, you know, bring in the right people and understand who your people are. The human tradecraft tactics of our adversaries are surreptitiously corrupting people through social engineering, and your staff, your people in your company and your organizations might not even know they've been co-opted. I mean, that's how sophisticated some of this social engineering can be. Or they are somehow, you know, more on the take, for, you know, to use a worse example. But the people within your organizations are the biggest vulnerability to egressing IP. And we're seeing that through China's 1,000 Talent Program and the way that Chinese sort of students are integrating into engineering departments and receiving core funding and core research opportunities in our academic institutions. So that's a core piece, is understand your people, and then hold your supply chain and your partners accountable. If your IP touches a partner, you need to have a system in place to have accountability for your partners so that you can kind of keep your supply chain resilient and keep your partners to the same standard of your expectations internally to your organization.
I know this is a very hot topic.
I
Jump
just
right
wanted
back in, then we're gonna go to
to
Mike.
say something on the sovereign funds aspect, because we're swimming in that lane a lot because of semiconductors. One of my friends actually sent me this chart which had the investments from China, the foreign direct investments, and it peaked in 2006, 2007, all the money they gave to all the other nations who were in need of money. And you can imagine those are all vulnerable nations, right? I guess 2 years ago, those debts became all due, which means their influence on those countries significantly grew. And this influence is of the level that the country cannot go negotiate with another bank to pay the Chinese debt. If they default, they have to only negotiate with the Chinese bank they've given to. So this is really, so there's a lot going on here, and I hear the government being very open about getting money from Middle East, from other places to do our major infrastructure. I would warn you, I guess, on this topic, because you know, we have enough money ourselves. I mean, look at all the pension funds and all these things we have ourselves. We just have to make it attractive for these people to invest in these. I saw the flow-through shares. I saw, you know, that got kiboshed by the government for the tech sector, which was really a big shame. Honestly, that was really a big miss in the budget. Yeah, for mining and other things, they kept it going so we can stay as a resources country. But these are really important. When we go to ask for money from these countries, we have to be ready for the day they're going to become due, and what are they going to ask us in return for those payments. So I know there's a lot going on here, and Canada's trying to attract a lot of money, but we have the money. We just have to find a way to incentivize the inside money to be invested. I mentioned this before in another panel about, you know, I feel that successful companies are built by people who have experience and have scars in their back. They have gone through supply chain. They have connections around the world. And those people are generally become affluent as well because they become successful with 1 or 2 exits. Now, if we had their money invested in new companies in Canada and they were Canadian, they would mentor those companies too. It's not just their money, but it's their mentorship that's going to make those companies successful. That's a different way of generating new companies in Canada. Not go and spread, you know, VC money to all people who come from universities and all that. Like, really try to give tax incentives for people. Remove the capital gain tax in the tech sector. So if you invest in a company here in Canada, no capital gain. You pay nothing. If you want to invest in NVIDIA in public market, 25%. We're coming from so far behind in this topic that government will not lose anything, any tax, because nobody is actually paying any taxes in that sector right now, right? It's not, nobody's making any money off the Canadian companies. So anyways, a couple of topics on the capital, sovereign capital, and also how to incentivize. entrepreneurs to invest more money in Canada?
Capital's been a very big topic. I want to give credit. You launched the Canadian Defence Investment Network. We have here with us today Kevin Reed from the Global Defence Security Resiliency Bank. We need that in this country. It would create immense opportunities. We are vying for that hard. I want to give Mike the opportunity to weigh in, and then we're going to do one final question and go to audience.
So I wanted to use an example of a global company that I think provides a framework for success, because it talks about kind of a 30-year growth horizon of building a business from really a nascent startup into a world dominant player. And that's TSMC, to use your semiconductor example. So Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing, one of, if not the largest semiconductor foundry in the world, right? Started out of government research out of the Taiwanese government labs and utilized intellectual property created by those labs to get enough of a freedom to operate from the Japanese and American semiconductor majors so that the royalty stack was low enough that they could have some positive margin and start to grow that business and reinvest that margin back into the business as it scaled. And then when it started to scale, they scaled their IP holdings and their registered rights dramatically, because you need to play in that environment, right? It is a market where patent licensing is a table stake if you're going to grow to have any sort of scale. And they scaled those rights, but did so in a very sophisticated way. It wasn't just patents, it was trade secrets, it was employment contracts, it was legal rights. If you went into one of their buildings, you were like being searched and you're taping off camera ports and USB ports before you got access to that. 12 to 15 years ago, all of the tech press said that the Chinese fabs which were getting set up were going to eat TSMC's lunch. That has never happened because TSMC was able to assert their IP rights, patents, trade secrets, employment contracts across the board, resulted in billions of dollars of damages and ownership stakes in the major Chinese foundries, right? And TSMC is still number one to this day. That was not what was predicted 15 years ago. China was going to dominate that space, and that hasn't happened, primarily because of really sophisticated IP management and the building of a strong IP program. Dick Thurston, who was general counsel at TSMC at the time, was kind enough to speak at this event last year. Great resource if any of you get the chance to see him speak in the future.
And one thing about TSMC, to complement that, is that they dominate their supply chain as well. So they have teams that design into their process that are owned partly by them. They have OSATs, which package these chips, which are owned by them. So when you go to Taiwan, when the first person in TSMC said, we're going to do this, 30 people line up. 30 companies line up. Their strategy and their vision against that. That's mobilization. It looks like a benevolent dictatorship. But it's phenomenal. So that's how they've done it. And there's a book just came out. I was there, when I was there 2 weeks ago, I met the author of the person who wrote the TSMC winning thing. It's a pretty interesting book. They made a movie of it as well. Yeah, but it's a really good use case. I agree.
Winning, what a great word to conclude on, because I would love to hear from each of you one key takeaway. We're just about to begin the next iteration of 3 critical IP programs in this country. You've shared immense insight, massive investments in defense. What's the one takeaway to win that we want to give this audience, knowing there are founders, innovators, IP partners, IP lawyers, and Government of Canada all here?
I would say customer intimacy. Give your customer intimacy to the Canadian company. Canadian-owned company, not the one with the address here, right? It's like the definition we just talked about. Give that intimacy to that person. Let them be the general contractor to go bring in Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and all these other guys. You can imagine how much leverage would that company have? Turn the tables around, and you have the right to do it.
Glenn?
I think Canada has a real opportunity to think a lot bigger, and I think we can really double down on building homegrown capability, right from ideation to our entrepreneurs, to our capital, to the output, which is core, critical Canadian capabilities that we can export to the world. And I mean, it's cliche, but I think it does involve a Team Canada approach. But I think Canada's been thinking too small on this, and we have the talent, the capital, the people, the vision, We have had our geography and our position in the world significantly changed from sort of the Cold War thinking to the new Cold War 2.0 thinking, where Canada is on the front line of this new geostrategic conflict. And I think this is a moment for Canada to step into this role and really assert ourselves as an influential middle power that can be a force of good in the world.
Playing to win.
I'll build on that. And to me, it's access to IP talent. We need the talent, the experience, and the expertise that can build into these companies the strategies and the ownership positions that we need to compete and win in global markets.
I promised you an incredible panel, right? Did they deliver? Do we have time for any questions? I'm going to look to the IC leaders. Maybe I'll look just to Mike. Mike, do we have any time for questions from the audience?
Quickly.
Couple?
Yeah.
Yeah, we started a little late.
Okay.
All right. You have an incredible brain trust here. One or two questions.
Hello? Okay. What do you think about IP that's being owned by Canadian subsidiaries of multinational companies? Is there any benefit to it at all?
No. Zero. That's it.
Next question.
Okay, so let's build on this. I would like to hear your perspective from what you're hearing from your SMEs or from innovators when they're going to start encountering government wanting to own the IP or join IP. It's not just default, you keep it coming out of the programs to avoid IP fragmentation and for national security if we start invoking more national security exemptions. Just want to hear a little bit about the thinking and how you're going to work with your community and your clients and customer base.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's I think you guys have a program already with this, right? Is the IP pool, you want to talk about that? Then I can talk about how we...
We'll talk about it later. We've got
Oh, it's in a different panel.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we need to pool our IP together. This is and then be able to use that as a stack. Because each of the companies may have, 50, 100 IP, let's say patents with, 1,000 claims. This will never be enough. And as a smaller company, you will never be able to put it against anyone else. So you have to bundle it together. I think one of the biggest crimes that Canada committed was to sell Nortel's IP. That was I don't know who was responsible for that decision. I think we got to have that person on the dartboard, because what they did, they could have licensed this, right? They could have licensed it, so this whole generation of people could have benefited from that. Why go sell it? I don't have anything against accountants, but I bet you it was a finance person. Yeah. So that was really a biggest mistake. I think having that pool, if we had that pool right now, all of our companies could have been part of that collective. You contribute, and then you can get defense for freedom to operate. Mainly for freedom to operate, not really for asserting it at first.
As a venture investor, if government is going to put a national security exemption on IP of a company, if the value of that company is held in their IP and the government wants it, they're going to pay for it, first of all. And they're going to reward that founder and that entrepreneur for building a critical capability. On the military side, there is an interesting, going back to your question, sir, there is an interesting interoperability challenge that we have, because we need to maintain interoperability with our allies. And that does require a level of sharing on some of these compartmented programs or sensitive IP. And so again, it comes down to building solid alliances. And I know there's a lot of emotive reaction right now with our American alliances. I was with the defense minister yesterday, and he assures the NORAD bilateral military alliance between Canada and the United States is airtight. And we have seen that throughout. So we're seeing some short-term stock market blips, but the trend line is very positive, and the trend line with our alliances continues to gravitate in a positive direction. It's hard to ignore some of the noise, but we need to maintain those core interoperability for military missions in common mission sets.
I'm going to pick up on the pooling of IP for solutions. When we think about that Defence Investment Agency, one of the goals that we've articulated in our strategy for Canada's Capital Region is to help bring SMEs together to do just that, to qualify at that threshold for that $100 million with the Defence Agency, the Investment Agency. One last question. Hello.
Hi, my name is Devashish Paul. I'm the CEO of Blue Wave AI. So the question is about investment and IP. Really, from the entrepreneurs on the floor, maybe partially question to Hamid also. So we can choose to hire like local grads from local universities, put them in our product framework, get them to invent stuff, keep them as trade secrets or file patents. And for a startup, that's a reasonable expense. In my company, over 10% of our expenses are patent related, but we're probably an exception. However, initially at least for the startup companies, we don't see any value uplift from the investment community for that. So our friends at BDC, for example, if we talk to them, they'll be like, well, we don't know how to value that. Like, let's just park it aside. It's not really worth anything. It's all dubious. It's difficult for us to put a value on that. So, what's your ARR? Okay, cool. I get the what's your ARR question. However, like, this whole conference is kind of pointless unless everyone has a motivation to actually file patents. Other than a few propeller head PhD founders who are like, I just want patents for my resume, so I'm filing them. The rest who are like business-minded founders are going like, why would I put an effort in this? And when I'm on the panel next, I'll just talk about what we're doing. But from a investor angle, like how do we get founders past that so that they feel incentivized to do it?
As an investor, I want to know that you're thinking about it. I want to know that you have internal governance to sort of regulate and protect what your core value proposition is. I want to see that you're putting the appropriate effort into safeguarding and treating with respect that crown jewel that is inside your company. And I think from a protections perspective, you need to look at two kind of markets. And so I think, and again, I'm not a patent expert, but I would suggest patents are probably more relevant for competitive corporate advantage. Very difficult to put a lot of stake or ownership in patents when we're talking about nefarious adversarial countries putting the full force of their economic statecraft into potentially egressing some sort of IP. That's where I say I've already assumed that that's compromised. But I think the patent and the protections comes from a commercial advantage when we're weighing your company versus a competitor's company for investment.
I'd say going to BDC and EDC to get money, I think is the wrong thing to do.
Told you this was no whole bars, right?
No, I mean, they were amazing organizations at the time where they were contributing to the ecosystem. I think right now they're not really effective. So they're the wrong people to talk to. This is maybe yeah.
What a note to end on. Thank you
All right.
so much.
Thank
Thank you, gentlemen.